All right, welcome back to Sane and Simple Podcasting, where I help you manage and promote your podcast with ideas, experiments, and so on. And today is podcast editing day, and I'm not going to share anything on the screen. I just want to talk about something really stinking important, and that is pacing, connections, interactions. When you have, and let me just say this up front, if you have a solo episode or a solo podcast where it's just you, this probably isn't going to apply to you as much as with folks that have two or more people on their podcast. But there's still some things I think you will get out of this, but more so for the groups of people. So here's my thing. You want to be you. You want to talk like you would in a regular conversation. In that space as much as possible. And when I say in that space, I mean if you have a super professional podcast in a very conservative field, then you want to have the conversational tone and pace. In any other industry, or you're just doing this as a hobbyist or an entrepreneur and you've got your own energy, your own vibe, you want to do that. You want to be that. It's basically part of branding, right? You want your energy, your vibe, your connection to match in your podcast editing. That includes your tone, your intonation, your exchanges, your reactions to people's things. I mean, if you're doing an audio-only podcast, and you have an energetic, lively personality, and that's part of your brand for your podcast, your business, your life, if it's your brand is that you're energetic, like some people we might know, then you're going to have exclamations and moments, and you're going to talk over people sometimes when there's a connection with the people that are on your podcast, whether they be co-hosts or guests or what have you. And that won't necessarily be true if you're, again, in a more conservative industry or space or whatnot. That's going to have a different tone. So think of it like you want to match. You want to match the energy in your podcast edits like you would match anything else. And I'm not going to say match your clothing, because some clothing clashes actually look really good together. So that would not be an analogy that works. I'm not going to say clash your food, because let's face it, hot air pop popcorn and tomato sauce with Parmesan cheese go really well together, and that doesn't seem to match. So we can't use those analogies. But I can say that you want your branding, you want your audio, your messaging, your text that you put out to the world about your podcast, and the sound of the words that are being spoken to match, not just in crispy, clear, good audio quality, but you want it to match in energy. And how do you do that? One, you talk to people before they come on your podcast, and you get them in the mood. You ask them questions. You're you before you start recording. You don't press record and then turn into you, and then they're like, how do I match that? And there's a little bit of confusion. But you also want to let them be them. Like, you don't want to force anybody else to be your brand energy. So there's a fine line here, right? Like, you want to edit your podcast in a way where it represents you fully. And if you have a co-host, them fully. And your guest, you want them to represent them. Okay. But the overall energy should match your brand energy. What does that look like in your DAW? That looks like taking out stagnant moments that might be too slow. That also means keeping those, if you have emotional moments in an episode, keeping those pauses that go with the emotional moments, even though we can't see them, because we're talking about audio only right now. Even though we can't see them, a lot of times we can visualize what's happening in people's faces when they're talking about an emotional moment. Don't delete those spaces. Spaces matter. They matter because sometimes you don't need them, and sometimes you need them, and sometimes you need more of them between sections of a podcast. If you have podcasts with multiple sections, you might need extra spaces to give people a break or to let them know that there's something different coming. Sometimes I'll hear a podcast and it'll go so quickly from one section to the next that I'm like, wait, what just happened? And I'm not just talking about ads. I'm talking about different parts of a podcast. So spaces matter. Pacing matters. Energy matters. These are things that you can't really throw into AI and have it clean up. These are things that you need to listen for and you need to massage within your DAW. And these take time to know how to do. I know because when I first started editing, I had one of my guests who had been about 2 years, had been into podcasting about 2 years more than me at that point, literally send me a message on WeChat because I was in China at the time. And he said, hey, did you remove every space from our conversation? Because it sounds really fast. And I said, wow, that's an interesting question to ask me. But yeah, I did take out a lot of spaces. Not everything, but I took out a lot because it just felt empty. And he's like, yeah, try not doing that next time and see how it sounds. And it probably was some of the best advice I've ever gotten in audio, because leaving in some of those pauses really did represent our conversation better. It represented our energy that we were having as we were talking about things that were difficult, challenging, things we needed to think about. If somebody needs a few seconds to think about something before they answer a question or reply or just kind of engage in the conversation that you're having, let them have that pause. What does it sound like? I mean, I'll tell you what this can look like when you're editing. You can literally, if you see a big space and you hear it and it's coming, listen to it first with the space. If you want to and you think it doesn't need to be there, take it out, listen again, and compare. Which one actually represents the energy and that part of the conversation and the people that are talking and all of those factors? No, it's not easy. No, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. But these moments, these decisions, these energetic, technical moments, these are really important in keeping the conversations real, because that's what it is. That's the conversations. Again, I'm not really talking about solo episodes, although some of the pacing stuff you can apply to it, but I'm really talking about conversations where there's more, obviously, conversation, more than one person. You really want to represent it in the most genuine, authentic way as possible. And to do that, you really need to slow down and tune in to the energy of the conversation. And yeah, if you have guests on all the time, it's going to be different for each guest. So you really have to pay attention the first 10, 15 minutes especially, and then you'll get into the rhythm of it. And then you'll know which spaces to leave and which to take out, which sections to leave, which sections to take out. You'll get an idea of what needs to be there and what doesn't need to be there, which isn't valuable for them. The last thing I'll leave you with is that the parts in the beginning where you're warming up and you're in your, meeting each other, that doesn't need to be there. It's good for you. Record it, delete it. It generally doesn't need to be there. Introductions, I still wonder about those. I stopped doing them, and now if the information doesn't come up about the guest during the conversation, I'll then put it by myself in the beginning. But generally speaking, always comes up organically. Always. And finally, the millions of thank yous at the end, generally speaking, are of no value to the listener. Do the thank yous with each other, delete it. Again, these are decisions where you're thinking of how the listener can get the most value from what they're listening to and where they can hear the connection that is being made between the people speaking. Something to think about. How do you pay respect to the connections that are being made in your podcast editing? I am so curious what you do and if it's evolved over time. Leave it down in the comments, or if you don't want to do it publicly, over at coffeelikemedia.com, I have a contact page. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and please be sure to check out the other videos that we have here on the Sane and Simple podcasting channel. subscribe, like, hit notifications, do all those things, because we'd love to have you come back, and I'd love to help you manage and promote your podcast. Tomorrow is Thursday. How did that happen? I'll be sharing a podcast promotions tip. So I'll see you then.